Okie dokie, everybody. It is time for us to go live once again. Very excited to be here for the Astro-Babble. Whoop, forgot to turn on my other light. There we go. Nice and illuminated. So we are here for the Astro-Babble. We're going to be going through 5 charts this morning instead of a regular 8 that worked rather well last time. These are charts that have been donated by you, my lovely followers on Instagram and Facebook, a blend of the two platforms. So we're going live on both Instagram and Facebook. You can always check out the recordings on either platform as well as on YouTube, where I post these recordings afterwards for those of you who are interested in maybe looking at previous episodes of the live stream. So we're going to take these 5 charts. We're going to read them cold, so I haven't looked at them before. We're just going to talk about astrology, talk about what I see in the charts. For those of you on Instagram, unfortunately, I can't screen share the charts, but I can screen share the charts on Facebook, and you can look at the recording later to get a visual image of the chart that I'm using as well. All of these charts are run in whole sign tropical. For those of you who know a little bit about astrology as far as house system and style of astrology, and yeah, I think that's pretty much it. If you would like to get on the live stream, you can always just private message me your birth date, place, and exact birth time, and I'll add you to the list and message you when your chart is featured. And if you'd like to book a private consult with me, you can always go to scorpiorisingastrology.com, or maybe you're interested in taking some classes or things of that nature. Yeah. Okay, so let's go ahead and pull up our first chart. Okay. First chart is going to be Brian. Let's take a peek at Brian's chart. So this lovely chart has a pileup in the first house. We have the South Node, we have Uranus in Sag retrograde, we have the Ascendant in Sagittarius, as well as Neptune in Sagittarius retrograde, as well in the first house of self, the first house of the body. For those of you who are following along with my medical astrology series that is currently going on right now, we had class on Monday and Tuesday. We'll also have class tonight, and we'll talk about chart synastry, so this will be kind of more important for you as I delve into the medical astrology aspects. But here we have Sagittarius on the ascendant, which, in addition to making Brian infused with a little bit more of that Sagittarius influence, which is kind of spunky, fiery, somewhat unpredictable, very mutable, happy-go-lucky, always seeking spiritually as well as the truth as well. Sagittarius is known for both of those topics. We also have the physical associations of Sagittarius, which would be the hips, the liver, as well as the blood vessels. And because we have Uranus and Neptune here, and both of them are retrograde, we have some issues in that medical department as well as the South Node. So South Node in a medical astrology reading indicates kind of the energy suck of the chart. It indicates where a body system is going to kind of be a black hole where it needs a little bit more energy than we can possibly give it, and it tends to underperform. So here we have the hips, the blood vessels, and the liver being a little bit underperforming physically. We also have Uranus, which tends to indicate unpredictability and some shocking tendencies or nervous system glitches, as well as Neptune, which is an outer planet that indicates hypersensitivity. So we can see how, from a medical astrology standpoint, we have multiple aspects of the liver, the blood vessels, the hips being a problematic body system, and also the personality of Brian also having some very interesting quirks, having some very interesting Uranian and Neptunian themes, which make him a little bit unpredictable with that Uranus, as well as a little bit prone to that hypersensitivity of Neptune. Kind of a good example of what this would be with Sagittarius would be that fight or flight phenomenon. And Sagittarius being mutable, we never know what direction Sagittarius is going to choose to go in, but it's always going to be the more exciting of the two choices. Whether that's running for one's life or whether that's fighting for one's life, Sagittarius is here for the excitement. We do have the ruler of the chart, however, which is Jupiter in Capricorn retrograde. Really, really difficult placement for a chart ruler because Jupiter is in the sign of his detriment and retrograde. Kind of the worst place for Jupiter to be in the worst condition. This is being echoed by current transits right now of Jupiter in Capricorn retrograde, as well as Saturn and Pluto retrograde through Brian's second house of finance. So there's a lot of financial difficulty, a lot of financial restraint, that kind of earthy restriction of Capricorn, as well as that retrograde or backwards energy happening in the chart. And because that's also the chart ruler, we also have some really intense personal kind of crushing themes that are looming over Brian right now from an energetic perspective. A lot of the themes that are opposite to the Venus Sun closeness in Cancer that we see in the eighth house of business or other people's money. There's a very strong heaviness when it comes to personal finance. Despite Venus transiting through Cancer right now and Brian about to have a Venus return, there's a really nice increase in using other people's money, like loans, taxes, liens, resources, rental properties, anything that allows him to tap into a clientele or a resource pool financially that is not his own. But from a personal perspective, there's a lot of heaviness, there's a lot of denseness that's currently transiting through the chart at this time. And I think, there are several themes here that kind of echo throughout Brian's chart. And one of them is the conjunction of the moon and Pluto in the 11th house of friendships, but then also the conjunction of Saturn and Mars in Scorpio in the 12th. So there's a lot of depth in Brian's chart, a lot of depth. And when I say a lot of depth, I don't necessarily mean that Sagittarius level of depth that's curious and inquisitive and constantly seeking. I mean Mars and Scorpio level depths, like you having both Saturn and Mars in the 12th house of karmic healing. Like, that's a very strategic choice. It can also be very heavy, can also be very poisonous if unchecked, if unhandled. So we have multiple tricky aspects in the chart that I think are both fun and watery and deep and interesting, but also can provide a little bit too much chaos when things aren't going the right way. But Mars in Scorpio really does have the idea of delving into personal growth, which echoes that Sagittarius theme of constantly seeking. And the moon conjoining Pluto in Libra, that constant need to find balance, to surround oneself with the people specifically, because the 11th house is the house of tribes, communities, philanthropic organizations that are here to kind of support the collective. That moon and Pluto conjunction really does say, finding a more powerful tribe halfway through the life who can both balance the intense, vigorous, somewhat dark, dry, depressive spiritual themes of that Saturn retrograde and that Mars Scorpio in the 12th house of healing and kind of spiritual lessons, but also balance that kind of flightiness and that curiosity and that mutable fire of Sagittarius. So I think we have these really pure dynamics in Brian's chart that know what they want to know what they want to do. Not always the most comfortable thing, but then we also have these restrictive aspects that are coming forward and counterbalancing that alignment in ways that are a lot more broody, a lot more dense, a lot more problematic in certain ways. Because we do have the North Node in Gemini in the 7th house, as well as Mercury, the ruler of that Gemini North Node, in Leo in the 9th house of spirituality. There's this really nice synergy when it comes to choosing a spouse or choosing somebody who you partner with relationship-wise, who's also a spiritual seeker, who's also a traveler, who's also somebody that is constantly interested in foreign cultures, or who may be a foreigner. Because the 9th house does deal with long distance travel, and is connected to that North Node in Gemini in the 7th, you're looking for somebody who's your magic carpet. The idea of somebody who's willing to whisk you away, somebody who's willing to travel with you, to explore with you, to really exercise a lot of those Sagittarius mutable fire themes, with Mercury and Gemini coming along for the ride, and figure out what it's like to have somebody as the north of your personal compass, as opposed to you being kind of sucked down into your own chaos which is very easy with this Moon, Pluto, Saturn, Mars, and South Node, Uranus, Neptune, all in that first house dynamic. So interesting interplay, but I think if there was a lightness in the chart to kind of lean into, it would definitely be the seventh house of relationships, and that ninth house of spirituality. Making sure that you lean heavier on those aspects will also shine light and bring truth into the Moon Pluto dynamic in the 11th, as well as the Saturn Mars dynamic in the 12th. And that's kind of what we look for in a chart is, in a chart like this where we have areas of great tension that have the potential to pile up on top of each other and constantly drag Brian through the mud of his own experience. Where do we find ease? Where do we find lightness in that? And we look at the aspects that are free and clear. We look at the aspects that are in a strong house placement. We look at the aspects that are going to be just really energizing and moving. And here we have that North Node Mercury interplay in the 7th and the 9th that have the greatest potential to be a safety rope, a safety net for Brian to kind of pole vault or catapult out of that denseness should he feel like playing in the mud is getting a little bit too difficult or too dirty. Excellent. So that is a little bit about Brian's chart. Let's go ahead and we'll move on to our second chart of the morning, which is going to be Janine. And we have another Sagittarius ascendant. This is a very different energy of Sagittarius as well, because we have some fantastic fire that's coming through. We have different energetics that are coming forward in this chart for sure. Fascinating. So we have a Sagittarius ascendant, which again brings that mutable fire energy forward in the chart and in the personality. But also we have Neptune and Sagittarius retrograde here, just like we had in the previous chart with Brian. So when we look from a medical astrology standpoint at Neptune in the first house, and this is actually something we talked about in the medical astrology lecture last night, is Neptune is sensitizing. Neptune is that planet that brings a lot of that kind of watery depth into the body system where it is placed, but also when that body system is on the ascendant, on the helm of the body, there's going to be a lot of that influence coming forward in medical ways. So Neptune, specifically in the sign of the liver, makes somebody very, very sensitive to medications and chemicals of any kind. Same thing with Neptune and Pisces. Everybody being born right now with Neptune and Pisces, especially if that's on the ascendant, the 6th house, the 12th house, those are going to be some pretty prominent themes medically. But the idea that Janine can have, half a glass of wine and feel like she's drunk, or take, half a Tylenol to get the same effect of that medication, but also that can be sensitivity to food as well, because Neptune makes things ambiguous, makes things wishy-washy, makes things a little bit too hyper-focused, a little bit too aware, a little bit too sensitive. Putting that in the house of the body can be somewhat problematic. We also have Jupiter in Sagittarius here, the lord of the chart in Sagittarius. Although he is retrograde, he's still in his own sign, which is absolutely lovely. Jupiter in Sagittarius in the first house does bring a certain amount of boldness, a certain amount of grandioseness to the personality. Often people will feel Janine coming before she enters the room, because Jupiter does bring that expansive property, especially with it being in a trine to Mars and Leo in the 9th. There's an idea that her aura, her energy field, her sense of her spiritual direction, her inflammatory fire tendencies, as well as her infectious laugh, her humor, all things that both Leo and Sag are known for, kind of precede her before she makes herself physically known or physically present. We also have this really nice pile up in Janine's chart. Speaking of fire and energetics in the chart, we have Mars in Leo, Sun in Leo, as well as Mercury in Leo retrograde in the chart too, in the 9th house of travel, foreigners, higher education, spirituality. There's a lot of really intense fiery dynamics in the chart, which I think are both beautiful, but can also be hard to handle. Fire is an element that can burn out of control if it's not kept in check. But as we look at somebody with very strong fire placements, that's not a bad thing in particular, but it is something that needs to be understood, because fire can be very useful at purification, transformation, and cooking, yeah, but it can also burn the hell out of you, right? And because we have this dynamic between the first house of self and the ninth house of travel, higher education, foreigners, spirituality, these are topics where Janine tends to, one, burn bright, but also potentially burn too bright as to scorch herself or others. Yes. Okay. Let's see. Interesting. Interesting. When we look at finances and relationship, those two things being connected, we have Saturn and Gemini in the seventh house, ruling the North Node in Capricorn in the second. So the idea that Janine's partners will provide a majority of her income or financial stability personally, because Saturn, the planet that rules her house of finance, is located in the seventh house of relationships. This is a very common pattern that we see with that particular astrological alignment. But the North Node in Capricorn in the second house does mean that Janine is going to be struggling with concepts that revolve not just personal wealth when it comes to finances, but also personal value, and the idea of what makes somebody valuable, what makes somebody resourceful. How can you use the idea of something physical like money, yeah, and translate it into things like power, things like drive, things like confidence, yeah. The North Node, where it is placed, tells us where somebody is striving, where somebody is trying to become the best version of themselves this go around. And when we see the North Node in the second, it's the idea of taking that financial house, that wealth house, and turning it into something that's really worth living for over the course of the life. We also have the moon in Virgo in the 10th being ruled by that Mercury in Leo in the ninth. So it would not surprise me if Janine actually works in as a superintendent or a supervisor or some sort of leadership capacity in the school system. That's something that we see with that ninth house being higher learning, specifically at the college level, and the moon in Virgo being in the 10th house of success, ruled by Mercury in the ninth house of higher learning. The idea that Janine's heart, her motivation, her subconscious need for emotional attention and fulfillment is going to be through managing the resources of a higher profile scholastic environment, which is always fun. We also see the sixth house of work, health, and pets, ruled by Venus in Cancer, in the eighth house of business, taxes, estates. It's an interesting formation, especially with that mothering, nurturing Cancer archetype. There may be side hustles involved, although we have primary career stuff happening in the chart with that moon Mercury placement, which I think is really, really cool in terms of education. We also have Venus and Cancer in the eighth house of business. So having a side hustle that involves the caretaking, the nurturing, like massage therapy as a side hustle would be a really big thing, or some sort of health and wellness profession that Venus and Cancer does very well with, being something that really fulfills Janine being of service, being somebody that others can come to for advice, for comfort, for a feeling of healing, which Cancer provides so well when accompanied by the planetary alignment of Venus. Yep. And that's it. That is it. Janine's chart has gone cold. So thank you so much, Janine, for donating your chart to science. And we will continue to move on with our chart dynamics as we go through. We have Carrie Ann coming in next. So Carrie Ann is chart number 3 for us, and we are going to be looking at, oh my gosh, all the fire, all the heat this morning. Absolutely ridiculous. So we've had 2 Sagittarius ascendants come forward in the chart dynamic thus far, and now we're dealing with our third chart in the lineup, and Carrie Ann's chart also has a fire sign on the ascendant, making a trine to a fire stellium in the ninth. So the theme of the first house, ninth house, but also the idea of fire being a very, very prominent theme this morning in the chart dynamic is coming through loud and clear. We have an ascendant in Leo, which really brings forward a lot of that fixed fire energy. Leo is known to be a little bit more dramatic, a little bit more flamboyant, a little bit more look at me, but for good reason. Leo also tends to be a showstopper. They know how to grab the attention of a room, of a crowd. Yeah. And to have the ruler of the chart via the ascendant in Leo being the sun in Aries at 0 degrees, she was right on that cusp, right on that cusp. The sun moving into Aries, the sign of its exaltation, ruling the chart, does bring a tremendous, tremendous amount of heat into the chart, into the life. There's a very strong association with Leo as a body system being in the spine, the heart, the eyes. With Saturn here retrograde in the first house as well, there could be something like scoliosis or spinal misalignments, eye issues like glaucoma, where the heaviness of Saturn comes to dominate the body system in question, as well as heart issues, should that Leo energy become suppressed. But because we have so much heat, it's just the idea of constant movement in the chart as being one of the major remedies that we can see for Carrie-Anne for sure. Especially because that Saturn is ruling the 6th house of health. The more I look at that, the more I really need to emphasize the idea of watching the bones, teeth, joints, especially the spine, because we have multiple skeletal misalignments that could be happening in Carrie-Anne's chart medically. But then we have this lovely stellium in the 9th house of spirituality, which I'm a super fan of. We have the sun in Aries, which is going to double down on that fire aspect of the personality. We also have the Mercury in Aries, which stimulates the mind and really does bring forward a lot of really nice leadership qualities, but in some ways an overactive mind that can somewhat be would be a good kind of analogy for a Mercury in Aries mind, a Mercury in Aries mental space. Dictator would be a good way to say it, with, or a harsh way to say it, with that leadership quality of Aries dominating the mind. But if channeled correctly, it is the sign of the mind of a leader, like having your head on straight to the idea where you can really command chaos and charge forward despite obstacles being in your way. Because we do have both the moon and the sun in Aries, there is a double Aries formation in this chart, as well as having a fire sign on the ascendant makes Carrie-Anne a triple fire sign. So partnering with that element is going to be extremely important, understanding the idea of radiance, but also should fire have too much fuel, it will burn out of control. Should fire have not enough fuel, it will fizzle itself out. Unlike water and air and earth, who can exist of their own volition, of their own accord, without the help of other external circumstance, fire is an element that requires conditions. Fire is an element that requires a certain amount of dryness, a certain amount of fuel, and without those resources and the spark to ignite it, fire will diminish and it will not exist. Whereas water will always exist, even if it's absorbed into the soil, it's still fluid. Air will always be present, even when it's not moving, even when we can't see it. And earth, like a mountain's just a mountain and you better get over it. Fire is that energy that really is the most conditional element. So we need to be aware that, especially from a spiritual perspective, especially from a travel, higher learning, as well as foreigners' perspective, that Carrie-Anne has stacked her chart in that space, in that fire element, to learn some very specific lessons this go around. So we have Venus in Aries retrograde here, which is probably the most unfortunate planet in Carrie-Anne's chart as well. Venus, the planet of love, the planet of yin, the planet of feminine curvatures and adoration and the goddess type energy that we would bring forward in a chart, is in Aries, the sign of her fall. She does not like to be in Aries, and she is going backwards. So we have this very, very strong, very, very hyper aggressive, very kind of prove it to me energy with Venus in this chart, which we may need to remediate if ideas like love, compassion, patience, temperance are in short supply in Carrie-Anne's life. We might need to work with that kind of one-on-one remediation-wise. But Venus ruling, let's see, where's Venus ruling? Venus is ruling the 10th house of success. Venus is also ruling via Libra, the third house of writing, teaching, communication. So we do have the idea of Carrie Ann actually teaching, especially at a college level, at a higher level, and being very well known for that. But her aggressive style, passion is not always appropriate, right? Just because you can burn bright, if that's your only trick, yeah, if you can't harness that flame and learn how to transform that flame to a dim candlelight that sets ambiance, to a scorching blowtorch that can melt metal, to a supportive hearth that can cook a meal, like if you can't transform your own fire, then like if you only have one inflammatory speed, then that's going to be a severe detriment in your chart, my dear. So you need to understand that there is a way to use fire constructively, but as a whole, fire does tend to burn more often than not. So that's just something to kind of be aware of as you start to pursue your dreams, your goal, your vision for the future. It's a very tricky balance to master the element of fire when you have so much stacked in that space. And with Venus there, one of the planets that would help to counterbalance that heat through her moisture, through her grace, through her healing and salve-like qualities, because she's compromised, she's not able to lend that help to you in that way. Let's see. Because Saturn is in the first house of self, and Saturn is ruling the sixth house of work as well as the seventh house of relationships, you finding a partner through your work who's actually very similar to you is one of the major goals of your personal kind of relationship style and your experience. Like you want somebody who's a hard worker, you want somebody who's preferably in the same profession as you, because you're also a hard worker and you're also a go-getter, and you also have all this heat, this fire, this passion that you would like somebody to share with you, and make sure that they're not distracted by stupid things like chilling on the couch and watching Netflix, and they're actually kind of going toe to toe with you and able to keep up with you with their goals, their ambition, their drive, even if they're not going to outperform you, because you're the star of your own reality with this Leo ascendant and this double Aries. Nobody can compete with you, darling. And if they do, they've made a very bad mistake. But you can at least find a peer who turns into something a little bit more sustainable, like a romantic relationship, through your work environment. You just need to make sure that they're checking off the boxes that you want to check off in your life as well, and that your goals align strategically throughout the life. Also, making money via teaching, via traveling. You would be an excellent sales agent for a travel agency. That would be flawless. Because that Mercury is ruling your second house of finance from the ninth house of travel and higher education, also working with foreigners, or from a spiritual context. There's a lot of ninth house topics that you would be very, very good at. So if you stick to your strengths, then that'll be a really easy house for you to navigate. Excellent. I think that's pretty much about it for Carrie Ann's chart. Thank you, Carrie Ann, very, very much for donating your chart to science. Good morning, everybody who's jumping on. Thank you so much for watching with me for the Astro-Babble. We are on chart number 4, just breezing through them this morning. And here we have Henriette from Instagram. My darling, how are you? And Henriette has broken the chain. She is throwing in her Libra ascendant to kind of counterbalance our fieriness, our heat this morning. Oh, there's the fire trend. She's got her moon in Sagittarius, making a trine to Mars and Leo in the chart, bringing that fire once again to the surface in our chart readings this morning. So we do have the ascendant in Libra, the North Node in Libra, Mercury in Libra, as well as the Sun in Libra. So she is a double Libra in the first house. So when we look to her horoscope, Henriette is one of those lucky people who, when she's told to read for Libra, it really does make a lot of sense to her, because she has both her ascendant, her core personality marker, and her Sun, her radiant personality marker, in that first house, in that sign. So she's got a double dose of that energy. But then she's also got this kind of wild child Sagittarius over here, who's really having a grand old time in the third house of writing, teaching, communication. It really does speak towards the idea of communication, teaching, writing being a very, very big part of Henriette's life. Wouldn't surprise me if she blogs constantly because she also has Mercury close to the ascendant in the first house of self. There's a lot of communication in Henriette's chart, a lot of communication, a lot of writing, a lot of teaching, a lot of sharing, yeah, from a verbal and written perspective in the chart. However, Henriette, one of the things that I would like to kind of heart to heart with you about for 2 seconds is the idea of all of the family nonsense and the home nonsense that you're going through right now and have been going through for the past year and a half or so with all of these very, very stressful Capricorn transits. So in your fourth house of family, you have Jupiter in Capricorn, who's naturally in his least favorite sign, in the sign of his detriment. But right now we have Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto all retrograde, all in Capricorn in your fourth house of family, which does bring a lot of power struggle, which does bring a lot of oppression, of repression, of suppression, of all of the Eschens, where your light, your fire, your will, your control is being challenged in that part of your life. And it's important to recognize that everybody with these major Capricorn transits is experiencing this level of power struggle. Yeah. But for you specifically, you've decided to put this power struggle in your fourth house of home and family. So it is very important to recognize that you're chewing on some very serious home and family stuff right now. Give yourself a break. Cut yourself some slack in that department. Because also you have Saturn and Aries retrograde in the 7th, relationship dynamics as a whole are shifting in very real ways, in very uncomfortable ways as well. But I think if I were to kind of summarize what these lessons are trying to teach you, they're trying to teach you how to be your own person. Like, you have your North Node in Libra, you're trying to identify as that peacekeeper, identify as that person who's constantly in balance, despite the world around you being out of balance most of the time, right? And that's a tricky lesson and a tricky role for you to assume while all of this is going on. And I totally understand that this dynamic in your chart with your North Node in Libra, Ascendant in Libra, Sun in Libra, so much Libra energy coming forward, all of these Capricorn transits through your fourth house of family are just knocking you left and right. And then to have your Saturn and Aries retrograde in a very, very tricky spot in the sign of his fall in the middle of all this. There's a lot of not okayness that's happening in the chart, which can be remediated in a couple ways, and we can always work on that one-on-one. But the idea of leaning into your cardinal signs right now, leaning into your leadership qualities, especially doubling down on your Libra-ness, doubling down on this Venus and Virgo in the 12th, where you really understand that there is sacrifice that needs to be made in order for beauty to thrive. Like, you do need to prune the plants in order to get them to their fullest potential. Like, you do need to edit in order to create a great garment. Like, there is this beauty that requires sacrifice element in the chart. But also understanding that, your fire, your value, your worth, your light is independent of that need to sacrifice. Just because you're being asked to grow, to change, does not mean that your value is in question. Let me say that again, because I think that's important for your chart, darling. Just because you're not perfect, just because you're being asked to change, just because you're asked to be better at this time and make decisions that are going to transform you into the person that you will become, does not mean at this exact moment you are broken in any way, shape, or form. That is not the case. Yeah. So lean into the change, lean into the transformation at this time, And really, like, if you wanted to lean into the easiest part of your chart, lean into the third house moon that you have, lean into the writing, teaching, communication, write poetry about it, journal about it, really turn it into a creative project. But also you have this trine between the moon and Mars in the 11th. So friendships and social groups, now that things are starting to open up a little bit, really make sure that you maintain those friendship connections as a very enlightening part of your chart, because that's going to be some of the ease that you can sink into while you learn how to mediate and remediate some of these tougher placements. And we can always work one-on-one if you would like to kind of talk about some more practical ways to remediate these difficult planetary energies that you struggle with. Okie dokie. Good morning. Good. I'm so glad. Everybody's enjoying the Astro-Babbles. Thank you, Alejandra. Henriette. Yeah. Thank you. I'm so glad that you enjoyed your kind of mini session. Let's go to our last chart of the day. So our last chart of the live stream of the Astro-Babble is going to be She's Venus from Instagram. Hello, my darling. Oh, child. Child. This Aquarius stellium in the 9th. Lord have mercy on you, with no surprise here, an exalted Venus in Pisces in the 10th. I'm looking at you right through Instagram. I see you, girl, and I like what I see. You're beautiful. You're gorgeous. And that I think is just absolutely lovely. But we need to kind of break down this chart and dissect this chart just a little bit more. So we have a Gemini ascendant, which brings forth that airy intellectual energy. We also have Jupiter in Gemini stationed in the first house. So there is that kind of expansive quality, not just of the personality, but also of just kind of the energetics of the body in that system as well. But the ruler of the chart is going to be this Mercury in Aquarius. We have the Sun in Aquarius, Neptune in Aquarius, the Moon in Aquarius, the MC in Aquarius, Uranus in Aquarius, and Mercury in Aquarius. That's 5 planets, 1 calculated point, one of those planets being the ruler of the chart in Aquarius in the 9th. So although this Venus in Pisces is exalted, and we need to get to it, as well as this this very, very lovely Mars and Scorpio in the 6th. I'm adoring your chart, darling. And this potentially problematic Saturn and Taurus stationed as well. Strategic, very strategic. We need to talk about the air influences in this chart. So having both the Sun and the Moon together in the 9th house in Aquarius has a pretty unique set of meanings. So anybody who's born with a new moon in their chart, I am one of those people, we tend to hide our emotions. Just a thing, yeah. The moon as representing of that emotional body, when she's hiding behind the sun, she is not able to be seen in the night sky, and therefore we look at the emotional body as represented by the dark moon as being a large portion of your emotions that are hidden from view from other people. Aquarius tends to be rather detached anyways, so I would really, really encourage you to, what I tell my new moon babies, my new moon clients during our astro consults is you need to remember to induce emotional vomiting. Yeah. And I apologize if that's triggering for anybody with eating disorders, but I think one of the things that we need to understand about a new moon in a chart, especially so prominently placed, is the emotions are hidden from everybody, including yourself. Yeah. Including your own reach. Yeah, especially being in the fixed air sign of Aquarius, who tends to just be like, no, I don't care, and tries to play apathetic when we know that they're the least apathetic person. They actually care way too much, which is why they lock themselves in the top of their ivory tower. But even more so with you, I think the idea of having this new moon in Aquarius in the 9th, retreating into spirituality, throwing this veil of illusion that you are detached, this veil of illusion that you have no feelings at a certain extent, or that it doesn't affect you. Honey, those echoes are deep. And just because you can't consciously feel them does not mean that they are not there. And as I speak to you, I speak to myself as a double Cancer with a new moon. Like, I feel you. I feel you, honey. So we need to be aware of that dynamic and, like I said, kind of induce the emotional vomiting on a regular basis. Really make sure that you're pouring your heart out, even though you don't think that bucket is full. I guarantee you that bucket is full. Having Mercury in Aquarius in the ninth, the Lord of the chart in the ninth, does give you a strong inclination towards ninth house topics of spirituality, travel, foreigners, foreign culture, higher education. However, we do have the Mars and Scorpio making a very strong square to the MC in this space. So I think one of the things that is tricky for your chart is work-life balance. Yeah. Should you learn? Should you go to school? Should you get a degree? Should you, exercise these airy placements and start to value your intellect? Not that you're not smart already, because Aquarius and having Mercury ruling the chart, like, you're genius. Aquarius is naturally the sign of the genius, but specifically Mercury, planet of the mind, in the sign of the genius, ruling the chart, like, that's some pretty heavy mental energy. That's some pretty quick thinking. That school might actually just be terribly boring. And that Mars in Scorpio really requires a deeper understanding, a deeper knowledge, a more palpable human visceral experience that unfortunately book learning can't really give. So there's this interplay of, like, should I go study something, or should I just get a job in that space and understand it inside and out from my own perspective, because I have a keener observation than any of these college professors could even dream of, right? So that's kind of a conflict in the chart for sure. But that doesn't negate the idea that the ruler of your chart is in the ninth. So you will constantly be learning. You will constantly be pursuing spirituality. You will constantly have this itch to travel, to explore foreign culture, and to unpack the ninth house as a worldly house. Yeah. So we have an exalted Venus and Pisces here in the 10th, which is just going to bring a lot of beauty and spotlight to you. And then we also have Mars and Scorpio in the 6th, house of work, health, and pets. So this is actually going to bring a very killer, precise work ethic, which I very much enjoy the energy of that as somebody who has Mars and Aries in the 6th house. Mars and Scorpio in the 6th house, like, you'd be a great professional ninja. You'd be a great spy. You'd be a great assassin. You'd be a really great lurker in the shadows. You have that ability to be extremely quick, extremely precise, extremely efficient, but also to operate without being seen should you wish. You have that invisibility cloak aspect of Mars in Scorpio in the 6th. But because that Mars in Scorpio is in the 6th, we need to be aware that as a health transit, as a health marker, that the reproductive system specifically is prone to inflammation, is prone to hyperactivity, is prone to burning a little bit too hot. So with that Scorpio body system of being reproductive, bladder, colon, sinus, we need to be aware of inflammation in those areas, specifically due to nervous system stress because of the squares from Aquarius. Also, reproductive and skin issues going hand in hand in your chart, because Aquarius is also known for ruling the skin. Making money from the ninth house efforts as well. It's interesting to me, like, you have a very strong influencer chart, is a good way to kind of say it, because that exalted Venus in the 10th of success, all of this kind of travel, all of this kind of learning, all of this engagement with foreign and international cultures, this really killer work ethic, but also kind of this hidden side to you that people don't really get to see. There's a lot of really good stuff working for you in the chart. But it all comes back to the ninth house dynamic. Everywhere we look for the chart, it's constantly coming back to the ninth. Before we wrap up the live stream, one kind of final aspect of this chart we need to kind of unpack is this very, very heavy Saturn in Taurus stationed in the 12th house of hospitalization, karmic healing, as well as kind of spiritual growth and hidden enemies. Whenever we see Saturn in the 12th, there are mountains that need to be moved on a karmic level this go around. And unfortunately, with the heavy planet of Saturn being in the fixed Earth sign of Taurus and also stationed, yeah, at his slowest point. Um, there's going to be some very serious kind of ancestral work that needs to be done, some bloodline work that needs to be done in order to purify the soul's journey, the soul's mission, that I think needs to be taken a little bit more seriously. Like, there's enough synergy in the chart where I think that you can let things coast a little bit and really focus on healing the dirty stuff, like the ugly stuff, like the untangible karmic ties that are still holding you back, kind of stuff. So really make sure that if everything's going well, and if you would like some extra karma points, if you would like to kind of get into some of your soul contract work, really delve into that 12th house Saturn and meet that hardness, meet those mountains head on, and really surrender yourself to the process of moving them. And taking a bite of that elephant one kind of spoon, one forkful at a time, and really kind of chipping away at those mountains whenever you have spare energy to do so through things like ancestor veneration, past life work, but also understanding, what the spiritual lessons are, and also putting them into practice through like helping others. 12th house, when we see prominent placements in the 12th, it's often, it is the house of hospitalization for a reason, but it's a house of therapy. Yeah, so not just going to therapy for yourself, but also helping others therapeutically through your platform is going to be a very important part of the work as you start to pull things full circle. Excellent. Thank you, my dear, for allowing me to read your chart through the live stream. And that is it. We are going to end the live stream at 45 minutes. Thank you very much for everybody. Oop, kept losing my Zoom. Thank you, everybody, for joining me. I am glad to be back doing the live streams. They do take a lot of energy, but I'm glad to kind of share astrology with you and give you a taste of how I read. And if you would like to learn astrology, or if you would like to schedule a private consult to support my work, you can always go to scorpiorisingastrology.com, which is my website. I have online classes you can purchase, as well as you can always schedule a consultation, and we can work one-on-one on your chart, kind of unpacking your life themes. But until next time, may the stars be ever in your favor, and we will